making the non-aggression principle law doesn't magically guarantee that everyone obeys it, but at least we're defining our society with a consistent, objective, and universal standard of law that defines crime in a way that can't be corrupted. That people can't say, oh, well, this is illegal because so many people voted on it, or this is illegal. No, it will be so simple. Does it violate self-ownership? If the answer is definitely no, then it's definitely not a crime.
Let me ask you this question. I don't mean to cut you off. What would happen in a situation where something happened that wasn't so common in everyday life? I don't know. I can't give a proper example. But say, you know how you say crime is going to be as simple what's crime and what's not crime, right? Say something, because a number of these always happen in life. Where this is why we got Supreme Court and you got to go up there. But my point is, say something happened where it's not straight defined as a crime, but it's not no victim. Does it make sense what I'm saying? Like
a gray area.
When you get to that gray area, what happens? Thank you. Perfect example. When you get to that gray area, what's the step then? I want to hear this one.
Okay, I knew that was coming because I already have the answer for it.
All right.
Okay, the Nations of Sanity idea isn't just to make the non-aggression principle the law. It's to establish the law through a three-part peace agreement. I said about making it the law through a peace agreement, and it's not just a one-part agreement. Say, right, we're making the non-aggression principle the law, and that's that. We're doing it through a three-part peace agreement, and the three parts go as follows, and this will kind of answer your question. So part one is just the basic agreement to establish the non-aggression principles of law. Part two is called lines in the sand, where we set limits of tolerance over the differing interpretations of the non-aggression principle. And then part three is about agreeing rightful ownership, again, based on the non-aggression principle. Now, part two is what's relevant to what you're talking about, because as you rightly point out, no matter how black and white the non-aggression principle is as a principle, there's always going to be fuzzy edges, there's always going to be gray areas, which is fine. But what we can do, and I have an article on my website that goes into this problem, because it is a valid problem, but it's not an ending problem. It's something we can solve. And the way we solve it is, the example I give, I use the metaphor of desert and grassland. So I say, imagine you're walking from through a geographical region from the grassland, and you're going towards the desert. Okay, you can clearly define the desert, and you can clearly define the grassland, and you know that they're different from each other. Just like we can clearly define the non-aggression principle violations that definitely are and definitely aren't. But in between, you've got this grey area. You've got this area that's hard to define. So like, in the desert grassland example, you've got this area where the grass starts becoming arid.
From the minute you cross over to the minute you make it there, that grey area.
Exactly, yeah. So my point is just because we've got this grey area, that doesn't mean we lose the black and white. So just because we have this grey area that's hard to define, that doesn't mean we can't define the desert when we're definitely in the desert. So what I'm saying is what we'll do is, with this part two, is we're going to draw lines in the sand where we say, okay, here is where you're definitely violating the non-aggression principle, okay? Objectively, this is definitely the desert, to use that example. Sand all around me. This is that. So by this universal law, this universal standard, you're violating that law, you're breaking the law, nice and simple. And then on the other end, you've got this definitely not, and you're definitely okay, and all the rest of it. This grey area in between, what we're going to say is, as part of the universal law, we can't enforce the grey area. We can only enforce the black and white. And the reason for that is because if I can't say, as a matter of black and white certainty, that you are violating the non-aggression principle, and I use force against you, then I'm guilty of violating the non-aggression principle if I'm against you, if you haven't. So the point is what we're going to do is we're going to have like a low resolution version of the non-aggression principle, where you've got this black and white standard, where you can easily define, and then the grey area in between you don't enforce according to the international, like this universal standard. But what you do have is you can have rules within voluntary collectives. So say, for example, I'm part of a voluntary collective, right? And you're part of a different voluntary collective, right? In the grey area, I can't enforce anything against you. So if you're definitely violating the non-aggression principle, and you're part of a different collective, or different society or whatever, you're definitely violating the non-aggression principle, then you're committing a crime and I can use force against you. But if you're in that grey area, then I can't, because I can't say you're definitely violating non-aggression principle. It's not part of this universal standard. But what I can do is, in my little society, is we can have additional standards that only apply to people that agree to those rules. You know, just like how I can say to you, if I invite you in my home, you've got to take your shoes off. You know, it's just something you're agreeing to be part of, or come in my house or be part of a club or whatever it is. You know, so these higher standards, we're not imposing those on people because, like I say, because they're grey areas, we can't impose them on everybody. But so we would have to establish them as part of voluntary collectives where they only apply to people that are part of those voluntary collectives. And you can obviously encourage and discourage people through peaceful means to be part of those collectives or not be.
What happens? What happens when two people oppose each other in their grey area? Who decides who's right?
Okay.
This is my question.
Okay, so
the grey area you're in.
If you're in the grey area,
right?
If you're in the grey area, it's no crime. Basically, we've got to say that if it's not definitely a crime, so basically what we're saying, like with the just go back to the desert grassland thing. So I'm not explaining this very well. Just go back to the desert grassland thing. If we say the desert represents what's definitely a violation of the non-aggression principle,
yes,
and the grassland represents what's definitely not, and what I'm saying is if you're in the area in between, it's the same as if you're in the grassland. We're saying the line. We're saying the line that we draw is the line in the sand that says you're definitely violating the non-aggression principle. That's the universal standard. And then what I'm saying is the grey area in between that, we can't force that as part of the universal standard.
It's the grass area.
Yeah,
it's the grass area.
I didn't explain that very well.
If you want to volunteer to come over here, that's fine. But it's the grass area. So the gray area isn't the gray area. It's the grass area.
Yeah, basically, we're saying the grey area is the same. So what I'm saying is if you're not in the black, if you're not violating the non-aggression principle as a black and white standard, then you're not violating the non-aggression principle according to this universal law. If you're in the grey area, that's the same as not violating it at all, according, you know. But what I'm saying is that grey area, rather than just leaving it, we can still have rules within those grey areas, you know, but those rules would only apply to people that agree to be part of those rules.